Now another concept comes to mind. What is life and what is abundant life? We will come back to that because that's critically important. But let's continue. The point I'm trying to make is you gotta remember that you're gonna need endurance. This is an endurance race. And for that, you have to ask for it. God needs to give you that endurance. But you have a part to play. You cannot just ask for endurance and suddenly you endure. No, you got your part to play. It's gonna be hard. That's why it's called endurance. But the athlete running the Comrades Marathon, he knows the race. The Christian does not know the race. And this is where prophecy comes in. That's the map. If you know what's gonna happen in your time, after you, and what has happened before you, that is your map to the race. It tells you when things started, where they were going, and it tells you about all the obstacles, what to look out for. That is prophecy. And that is the part that you need to run the race. And that brings us to prophecy. Why did God give us prophecy? Well, he answered that and he said, He does nothing except he makes his intentions known to his servants, the prophets. So you get the intentions of God by reading these prophecies. And what does prophecy do? Well, it tells us about the start of the race. What race? The race of the people of God. The race to win the crown of life. Those who came before us and those who will still come after us. All of that information is available to us. But you must remember we spoke about generations. So that made me think of a relay race. There has been people running before us who had a baton or a baton, and they pass it on to the next generation, and then they run for a while until they're tired, all the while applying their endurance, and then the baton is passed on, and we each run our short part of the human race, but we all go for the same goal, and that is the crown of life. But we do not cross the end of the line at the same time. Some have already crossed that line, some are waiting, and some are still running, and some will soon start running. We do not know when the end of the race is. Plus, you cannot get into a bus and ride along. Like, for example, think that the church is a bus and you're going to ride in this bus. You could, I suppose. I don't think it's necessarily wrong to take the bus, but the problem is if the bus goes in the wrong way, you might have to get off that bus. And there might be different buses, and some of these buses might be heading in the right direction for a while. And then something goes wrong. Some of these buses might break down, etc., etc. And then you might have to get off the bus and continue on foot. Most of our journey is going to be on foot. Sometimes we're walking, sometimes we are running, and sometimes we're sitting under a tree and we're tired. That's where rest comes in. So remember, preparation, rest, and endurance are things that you need for this race. And that's why I said prophecy helps us prepare. Prophecy gives us the critical information we need to know where we are going. What is the route of the race? It also tells us about every single obstacle in our way. It also tells us that we need to look out for certain things that will be coming. We cannot change the future. We cannot change the route of the race. We only have a map of that, and that map is given to us by prophecy. And that's why we study prophecy, so that when we run this race, we know where we're going, what might befall us, what lies ahead, and we can gain all the promises, but also the warnings. What is the difference between a promise and a warning? Well, both speak about things in the future, but the warning is something that God expects you to look out for, because He did tell you. He always says, I have told you these things in advance so that when it comes to pass, you would know and have understanding, and you would recognize these things. This is prophecy. Now, if you don't have this knowledge, you don't understand. And at the end of the day, you're going to get tired. Even if you have all the endurance in life, you're going to come to a point where you do not want to endure anymore. And you're going to start asking these questions. Why, Lord? Why me? Why us? Why now? And you're going to become a little bit of a reluctant person, and you might even turn to a small rebellion, or even a big rebellion, actually completely rebelling against God, because you just don't understand, it doesn't make sense, it doesn't look right. And that's where your image of God or your understanding of God comes in. And that takes us back to the different streams. That's why I said there's different groups. Now, if you believe in things like abundant life, but you have an incorrect idea of what abundant life is, you might find yourself in the shoes of the Jews, who thought that abundant life is now here on earth. It means the abundant does not describe the life. Abundant describes your circumstances while living, meaning you have everything you need in abundance. That's, according to me, that's wrong. Some of today's Christians also believe that. I do not believe that. I believe that abundant life, if you have water, then you have water. If you have abundant water, you usually have more water, lots of water. All right? I say if you have life, you have life. If you have abundant life, then what do you have? You have more life, a lot of life. What is that? That's everlasting life. Because if you're going to compare everlasting life to earthly life, then earthly life, the short span of life, would be just life. But everlasting life would be abundant life. And having said that, there's a lot more I can say. But remember, this channel is theology and prophecy. The two goes together. You cannot do prophecy without theology. And today was a bit of theology. I want to go into the prophecy now. I'm going to read you Daniel 11 verses 40 to Daniel 12 verse 1. And then we're going to ask a few questions. And those questions we're going to keep in our mind as our goal. And then we're going to go back and we're going to start studying the prophecy. Remember, a few things has happened. If you have not noticed on the news, Islam, and we haven't even spoken about that faith. We've touched on Christianity. We haven't even touched on Judaism or any other religion. We might touch on it as we go along. But Islam is standing up and it's making inroads into the Western world, which used to be known as Christian world. And you might know that Christianity and Islam is very, very, very different. We will speak about the two gods or the one God for both these groups. But for now, this is something we can see happening that maybe 20 years ago our parents did not see, because life was way different. Also, we see a lot of immigration from one country to another, migrations, and people amassing in certain areas, changing those areas, changing the religion of those places, areas, countries. And this goes hand in hand with Islam. And what is the problem with that? I don't have to say there's a problem with Islam. All I can say to you is the problem that I see is the replacement of Christianity. All right? That is a concern to me, because it means that my brothers and my sisters, the people who were running the race with me, are in decline. And some of them are persecuted and actually killed, and they are dying, and there's people paying other people to kill not necessarily Christians, but people from another group that serve the same God I do, but see him differently. And you know who that is. Those are the Jews. Now we'll talk about the differences between us and the Jews, but for now, that's a clear sign and an indication. And if you read prophecy, you will know that Jesus did warn us of serious persecutions. We can go back to prophecy and see what God said in prophecy about persecution of Christians. And there's been persecutions in the past, and there will be persecutions in the future. But this can help us to place us and see if we may be much further down the race than we thought of. Because there's a lot of groups who puts many of the prophecies that we read into the future. Why? So that you don't worry about it. You don't look out for it now, because they have pre-programmed you that this is going to happen somewhere in the future. But if they're wrong, and if you're a historicist, you can look for things around you. That is what we call present truth. It's things that might have been prophesied earlier and was not applicable to those people. But now we see them happening, and we have gained on the race, and in our time these things are happening. So maybe they didn't write about it. Now you can see it, but it was prophesied, and then you can link it up. So we want to look at things around us. I'm just trying to bring it together, and I think in the next episode we will first read those verses, and then we will ask those questions, we will list them and keep them separate and try and answer as many of them as we can and study prophecy to find those answers. But at the same time, we need to look around us and see what's happening in the world right now and see if some of those are time indications that can plot us on the map. Thank you for watching with me. I appreciate the time you gave me. And I look forward to seeing you again. Until then, I greet you in the name of Jesus Christ, and may God bless you.